Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, your host for a special Super Tuesday edition of the Conservative Five. Today we're coming to you live with a great panel of political minds from LibertyNation.com, your home for free thinking and free speech. Our topic, the fallout from Super Tuesday 2024, including Nikki Haley's campaign suspension. Here's our panel: senior political analyst Tim Donner, chief political correspondent Graham Noble, legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza Esquire, and editor-in-chief Lisa K. Donner. Okay, gang, it's time to discuss and dissect wins and losses and tears. I'm going to start with Tim. Nikki Haley, who said she was going to be in it to win it, just decided she was done. Did that surprise anybody?
I think the mistake that most of us made in analyzing this race was to believe it was an open primary, that Donald Trump would just be sort of on equal footing with Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, and the others, and it would be considered a challenger. Whereas, in fact, this has been effectively an incumbent running for re-election. And part of the reason I say that is because Nikki Haley ran a very effective race. She couldn't have really done much better than she did. She showed why she has been a stalwart on the conservative side going back to the George W. Bush days, and that she has a future. But she got her clock cleaned by Donald Trump because, look, it's just not her time, and it is Trump's time. How she handles, though, the Trump candidacy going forward will say a lot about her future if she embraces him and points out that, you know, she has had her differences with him, but she also worked for him, was an effective UN ambassador, and that the alternative is so unthinkable that, of course, she is going to endorse Donald Trump. So she gave a good account of herself, but she never had a chance. I think that's
Tim,
a fair assessment.
I heard Nikki Haley say this morning that she was going to wait and see if she was going to vote for Donald Trump or not because he would have to earn her vote. And I thought, your comment about it being a kind of a incumbency vote was, I agree with that, and it was preposterous for her to then make that claim because unlike a typical primary campaign where the person wasn't president of the United States before, what more information does she need? She had 4 years of a Donald Trump presidency to get
maybe she's gunning for. Does anybody answer this question? Is the dream team ticket now for the GOP Trump, Haley?
No.
It may be, but look, I think the only reason that Haley hasn't endorsed him yet is so she can maintain her leverage. If she endorses him right away, she becomes irrelevant. If she holds out the endorsement, she continues to be in the news cycle. Will she endorse him? Won't she endorse him? And the same way that Trump is holding out who he's going to pick for VP, she's holding out in order to create some suspense and more keep herself in
All
the
right,
news.
she's trying to be relevant, but why do you say that's not the dream team ticket, Sarah?
Well, because I don't think anybody who's been funding Nikki Haley will allow it. They don't want Donald Trump in there. That's the only reason she had such huge backing, is that they're the never Trumpers. They don't want him. So to allow her in there, I think that's never going to happen.
Well, I know that a lot of MAGA people don't like Nikki Haley, but I never really thought of all of Haley's people as never Trumpers. Is that legitimate? I'm just
I thought
thinking
they were
about
mostly
I would
Democrats.
agree with that. I would agree with that observation. I think you were spot on there, Lisa, that a Trump Haley ticket would not be pleasing at all for Trump supporters. I think they would be tremendously disappointed, upset maybe if Trump chose
They would still
Haley
vote
as his
for him.
running mate. But yeah, Haley, I think the Haley voters, I think you're right. I mean, maybe a lot of Haley's supporters were people who kind of thought maybe it's time to move on from Trump. Maybe we need someone else, but they're not really hardcore never Trumpers.
They
Right, and
dumped a lot of money into her campaign for a reason.
but she got a lot of independence, which
Hmm.
she could say she does well with independence. She's extremely popular with women, which is why she really has a future. And she used that as a point against Trump, and it might have worked if Trump didn't suddenly pass Biden in the polls and and find himself leading in most battleground states and in the national. So all of a sudden that factor doesn't become as relevant about the women. But she has a future if only for that, because Republicans have struggled for so long with the women's vote.
Well, hasn't Trump already said he knows who he's going to pick, but he just hasn't, you know, told anybody out loud?
He's creating suspense himself.
He
I don't
is.
know whether he's picked or he may very well not have.
You
But
know, I wonder if we should harken back to JFK picking LBJ because, there was a lot of angst between those two. They didn't like each other, but he picked him because he needed Texas. And it was another extremely close election. And probably picking LBJ was what put JFK over the top. So I'm just wondering, it could be Haley, it could be DeSantis, but he needs somebody to put him, I think, a little more in command of the general election. He's doing really well now, but I think he
I
wants a
mean,
no
Donald,
doubter.
can I just
here.
say, Donald Trump's brand seems to be anti-establishment and radically pro-free speech, and I think Nikki Haley counters both of those
I agree.
kind
I
of
agree.
waves. So to me, by accepting Nikki Haley, while he may gain a significant other audience, he's going to lose some portion of his, and if and that portion who are the hardcore because they think he's fighting for those free speech notions, for instance, and Haley is kind of
Yeah.
Well,
radically
I don't want to
opposed.
be the optics girl in this discussion because it goes way deeper than optics, but you got to consider it. I mean, he can't pick a white guy. Is he going to pick a white woman that his MAGA base doesn't like? No, he's probably going to go for a.
I think
I'm going to say
I
I'm going
think
to say Vivek. I
I
don't know,
think
but I don't believe he's going to go with a white guy or
Well, he
gal.
could
And
go with
that's just
Tim
my
Scott
optic.
or something like that, but
Exactly.
I think a dark horse choice here for the second spot would be Tulsi Gabbard. And
Yeah.
because it's kind of a unity ticket, she's very much in tune with his message. She's a former Democrat. She's attractive. She's well spoken. She's experienced on the national level.
wow.
Another possibility is Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, who's
Hmm.
very
Not to
attractive,
be confused
and
with the governor of North Dakota.
Mr. Doug Burgum, right?
Bergam.
No, I agree. It's got to be. Tim Scott's been right there. You can see that Tim Scott is basically campaigning to become
Yeah.
VP. His enthusiasm level at the Trump rallies is higher than Trump himself, and Tulsi Gabbard has shown up. So I would expect he either can decide that since he's doing so much better among black voters, he can really close the deal by picking Tim Scott,
Yeah.
or he may feel that he can carve enough out of the women's vote by picking a woman. It
Well,
depends on what he thinks he needs.
Mhm.
let me
You
just
know,
say, Tim, I mean, in the New York Times Siena poll, he was neck and neck with Biden with women. I mean, they were both at like 46 or something like that. So,
that was a real jaw dropper.
right, he's gaining ground with the Hispanic, Black, but mostly with the women, which is really interesting.
I agree.
I guess,
I
Sarah,
agree.
we pivoted off.
We've
Yeah.
we've dropped Haley back in the corner, and so let's go back to Graham and let him give us kind of a roundup of what happened on Super Tuesday. Was there any surprises, mistakes along the way? I mean, what'd you see, Graham?
Well, I'm not sure if there were really that many big surprises. I mean, obviously, from a perspective of if those people who are big Trump supporters, they're obviously going to be delighted that he took 14 of the 15 state contests on Super Tuesday. I thought a couple of the results were kind of interesting. you know, it's tempting. Look, if you're a critic of Trump's, whether you're a Democrat or whether you're perhaps a conservative Republican, but you're also a critic of Trump, it would be easy to look at a few of those results and say, well, you know, Trump didn't really, you know, he didn't his kind of a big margin of victory, but it wasn't overwhelming. Is that possibly a weakness? Is that, you know, a crack in the Trump wall, so to speak, the MAGA wall? But if you go back and compare the results from yesterday, you know, at the time we are recording, it is Super Tuesday was yesterday. If you go back and look at the margins of victory compared with 2016, I mean, in 2016, Trump lost a few states in the primaries to either Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, and he you know, his path to the nomination was by no means certain until kind of late in the day. And this time his victories were in most states decisive. Of course, he dropped Vermont. And there were a couple of close races in states that you would expect. You know, they were closer, like in places like Colorado, Massachusetts, Maine. But then again, even in Maine, he cracked 70%, 72%. So I'm not really sure there were any surprises, and I think overall the results for Trump were, I would have to say, you know, from his point of view, extremely encouraging.
Well, okay, so I want to bring this into the fold. There's always that wild card. And in my opinion, only my opinion, I think it's RFK Jr. And I know he's not on the states, but man, he's attracting attention out there. And he's not a fan of Joe Biden, but he's milk warm about Donald Trump. So where does he play after a Super Tuesday where obviously Biden won and obviously Trump won? Where does he fit into that?
Well, he has actually finished first among people, I think 35 and under in a couple of polls. So RFK Jr. is sort of like a centrist version of Bernie Sanders, where he's an older guy, but he has a very young audience, and he projects a lot of energy. He's been he has been marginalized by the Democrats. And I keep pointing this out, and I keep doing it to show you exactly what the Democrats are all about. The fact that here's the scion of a family defined by two assassinations. And Joe Biden's administration wouldn't even provide him with Secret Service protection. He was shunned. He was marginalized. They got other members of the Kennedy family to do it. And now he's something of a victim, too. I think a lot of people are looking at him and saying, why did the Democrats push him out the door like that? I think he's the biggest wild card factor because you've got Jill Stein and Cornel West running as well, but they're going to pull votes strictly from Biden. As far as Kennedy, it's debatable as to who he would take votes from, but he is on the ballot in 6 states so far, including 2 or 3 swing states. So he will be a factor because he's been polling in double digits.
Tim, I think you're the one who told me that he was trying to flirt with Rand Paul for political allyship. So what that says to me is he's looking to get those that's a Trump kind of pull rather than a Biden pull.
Will he go full on libertarian? If he does go full on libertarian, he's guaranteed a place on the ballot in I think all 50
for my
states.
yard sign.
Isn't that right? Aren't they on the ballot in all 50 libertarians?
Oh, yeah.
I think they are.
Well,
so,
it's funny because what happens is there's such a war against third-party participation in this country that while they have been on the ballot in 50 states, sometimes they lose that status and then have to fight again for it with like signature campaigns and such. So I can't say definitively what the current state of things are, but yes, Lisa, the thrust of it is, wide availability.
So he could technically be a real troublemaker for the top parties.
I don't know if you guys were aware of this, but in 2020, famously in 2000, when Al Gore was beaten by George W. Bush, even though I won the popular vote.
Don't talk to Democrats about that.
Ralph Nader was blamed for Gore's loss. In 2016, Jill Stein was blamed for Hillary Clinton's loss. But few people are aware of the fact that in 2020, the Libertarian candidate vote in Arizona and Georgia and Wisconsin or Michigan, I'm not sure which, were all greater than Trump's margin of defeat. So in other words, if there was no libertarian, Trump probably would have won in 2020. So there's always a third party factor. It's just a matter of degree. But RFK is going to get more than Jill Stein ever did. I think he could go into low double digits, would be
That
my
Kennedy
guess.
name's worth a few digits by itself, right? No
I
matter
would
what.
think.
But if he
I
goes,
would think so.
don't you guys think if he goes to the Libertarian ticket, he's going to pull more from Trump than he is going to be pulling from Biden? I'm just asking.
It's probably a wash. I would say, well, I think he could pull
Yes,
from
from me,
both
Lisa.
sides.
Okay.
I mean, this has been such a weird few years anyway. Why not throw it up and, have the weirdest election 2024 and
Well,
maybe
it's
have the
going to
House
be whether we
decide?
like it or
Why
not.
not? Why not? Let's just do it all. This has been one of those last 4 years been crazy. So I I don't know. And here's another question. Lisa and I have talked about this a little bit before, but everyone, oh, we need younger people, we need new blood. And here we go. We got Trump, who's 77 or 78, Joe Biden, who is a million years old, it seems, and yet they're the top two people on the presidential radar. Where's those young people? Why aren't people putting them up there? Nobody
Sarah,
seems to want them.
you're so right. I totally agree with you. There seems to be like some kind of disconnect between the parties and the people, because the people are saying, we want somebody new, we want somebody new. And every time somebody new pops up, like RFK Jr., the parties go, no, take him
Well, they
away.
argue.
This is the whole problem with Congress. It's the same thing. I mean, you have these people who are re-elected over and over and over again to Congress, and they spend a decade or maybe even 2 decades or more in the House or the Senate. And yet, when you speak to voters, they're always saying, "Well, we need new people in Congress. All these establishment types who are there all the time. Nothing's getting done. It's dysfunctional. We need some new people." But my senator, no, he's okay or she's okay.
Yes.
My representative
It's everybody
is okay.
else's.
So I'm going to go ahead and re-elect those, but we need all the rest of them to change.
That's
Exactly right, Graham. That's been a popular sentiment in this country for probably 30 years, is that we need to throw the bums out, but they re-elect their own bum.
Well, look at the Republican primary. Okay, you look at the Republican primary. Okay, supposedly Republican voters were not satisfied with the choice of Trump. Well, they had at least 3 or 4 other candidates that could be considered impressive, plus candidates like Chris Christie, who was experienced and a good debater. So they had their choice. The Republican voters had the choice of somebody younger, and they overwhelmingly picked Donald Trump. So this whole idea, we want people young, that may very well be true on the Democratic side, but it is not on the Republican side, no matter what anybody says. I
think you got to realize in the Democrats, Republicans do this too, but the Democrats have this, thing of, well, he's party loyalist. So you get in line there and you work your way up and eventually you get to the top spot and they're all for you. The Republicans are not so good at that. The best guy doesn't always necessarily take the nomination. Super Tuesday in 2000 was a perfect case. John McCain was right. He would have been the perfect guy. He was popular. He was the maverick. He had his wits about him. He was a younger candidate, and Super Tuesday rolled around and he conceded to George Bush, who said, hey, we'll bankroll you and we'll make sure you win in 2008. Well, times change and it wasn't his time anymore and he lost. And
but that gave him the opportunity to come up in 2008, right, Sarah? Because then it was
but the time was gone. His time was gone. Now we have, the Barack Obamas that blow onto the scene. And he was mesmerizing, and people fell all over themselves to be near him. He gave great speeches. He sounded like a unifier, and obviously he wasn't. But yet, that was the attraction. John McCain didn't have that attraction anymore. John
Well,
McCain was a badass.
Well,
And
that's
well,
why you have to know your time, and sometimes
yes,
it's
and
not always obvious. Like
John,
it's
Ron
not always
DeSantis,
obvious.
Wait a
you
Ask
minute.
look at
Hillary Clinton.
Ron DeSantis might well have thought this was his time because he won re-election in Florida
Right.
by 20 points. He was a national figure. You
Mhm.
could not blame him for thinking it was his time, but it wasn't. Chris Christie's time was 2012. He might have done
Mhm.
better than Romney. I don't know if he would have beaten Obama. Probably nobody would have. But when he ran in 16 and now again in 24, his time is long since gone.
Yeah,
Hang on. Now,
it's
what
it's
were you going to
over.
say, Graham? You were going to say
oh
something.
no, I was just going to say about about the whole 2008 thing. To me, I kind of believe that 2008 was actually John McCain's time. He would have been president if it wasn't for suddenly this guy that most people had never even heard of, Barack Obama. His appearance on the scene was an anomaly. So I kind of think 2008 would have been McCain's time if he had been facing any other Democrat other than Barack Obama,
Well, it was going to be Hillary
who
before
was
Obama
who
cut the
was a
line and
phenomenon
got in
all on
front of
his
her.
own, you know.
I'm not sure that's true, though, because George W. Bush was like below 30% approval when he left office. The Republican brand had basically been completely devalued through Iraq and then the recession. I sort of think any Democrat could have won in 2008, if only because the Republicans had been so weakened. But Obama was a phenomenon. I mean, he could have won what
Well,
did he
Yeah, he
win,
was
35
He
states?
sent
mesmerizing.
he sent chills up people's legs, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
Yes.
But
especially Joe
I would
Biden's.
just I would just counter your point, Tim, with one observation, and I think this is, and what you're saying kind of makes sense if you look at, historical, trends of elections, and certainly you're right, the Republican brand was kind of tarnished at that point, but somehow I feel that John McCain would have been he would have been the Republican revival. And I really do believe that he would have won despite the tarnished brand. I think people would have said, oh, okay, Republican voters would have said McCain's going to turn this one around. He's the man. He's our uh, our reputation will be saved by McCain. And I still think he would have won if it hadn't been for the facts this kind of force of nature, Barack Obama, who suddenly appeared on the scene and snatched it away. I mean, it's my opinion, but
The
that's the way I
problem,
look at 2008.
Pretty
I
sure
just
that's
want
what happened in 2016. Same thing.
Yeah, it was Hillary Clinton's time.
It was her
2016 was
time,
Hillary
and
Clinton's
and
time. And
and
then all of a
Trump kind of came
sudden,
down that
Trump came along
escalator
and
and
bang. Yep.
blew everybody away.
And then
I think
another force of nature
Obama
named
stole it from
Trump.
her, and
Yes.
then Trump did.
Yeah.
okay, I
Couldn't
think
control
Yeah.
that
it.
the problem that the Republicans have in their party is they always do it. Now it's your turn. Now it's your turn.
Democrats do the same dumb thing until they see their fastest racehorse come out of the gate, and then they all get behind it, and they don't fight.
Yeah.
They get
Yeah.
behind it.
Bob
Yeah.
Dole had his turn, right? That was the last time I remember being so
Dole
pressured
was
in the
96, right?
96, right?
Yeah.
And then came Bush and then McCain, then Romney. It was Romney's turn. And it's like they forced Romney to bow out in 2008. Get the hell out of here now. They booted him out so that they could run him in 2012. And what good
Yeah.
did
See how that worked? Yeah.
Yeah. How did that work out for you? Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in 2012, we were still in the throes of the recession, in some sense of the fallout from it. And people blame George W. Bush. So
Mhm.
it's still in 2012. So Romney, um, you may recall in the run up and after 2008, in the run up to 2012, they kept talking about plutocrats and how plutocrats had been responsible for the recession. So what did the Republicans do? They nominated a guy who's a plutocrat.
Right.
So, Romney was a plutocrat as he was seen. So timing is everything.
But
Timing is
anyway,
everything.
back to Super Tuesday.
That was,
All
You
of
know,
that.
here's one thing I'll throw out.
Hey, Graham wants my job, darn it.
Here's one thing I'll throw out to the rest of the panel, and that is how is the left wing, the establishment, so-called mainstream media, going to handle the Super Tuesday results? I'm going to say that they're going to that the narrative is going to be, well, look at Joe Biden, look at his results in every state. He was in almost every contest. He was above 80%, sometimes above 90%. And Trump won all the contests that he won. There was one or two of them he was over 80%, but the rest of them he was at like 60, 70%. That shows right there that he's not nearly as popular as Joe Biden is.
Right.
I think
Yeah, that's good
actually, and
spin, yeah.
I know this because I like self-flogging. I turned on every major news outlet this morning and just briefly went through them. And I'm not talking about any conservative sites. I'm talking about the drive-by media. And they conceded. They concede. Trump's the guy. It's bad. It's nose and nose. It's Biden, Trump. And they've also conceded that Trump is up in the polls in the swing states. And I was amazed that they even admitted that. So I think they're getting geared up to have probably the busiest watch season ever. I think they're happy about it.
Well,
Wrong?
they feel so guilty for what they did in 2016 when they gave Donald Trump billions of dollars in free so-called earned media. They created the phenomenon of Trump. They created the monster, and then the monster came back to swallow them up. And
and they're
they
still
sure don't
feeding
want
that
to do that
monster.
again. That's why they buried the laptop story in 2020. They buried the Hunter Biden laptop because they weren't going to be responsible for Trump winning again.
Well, and
has all
here's the other
hallmarks of a
thing
classic
about
Russian
that.
disinformation campaign. I mean, somebody has to say it.
Right. But here's the other thing about
I thought we were told we can't use that unless we're like on social media.
Right.
Can
But
someone define the difference for me between misinformation and disinformation?
Disinformation.
Well, and you got
One you're
malinformation
stupid
as
and
well.
one you're
And then there's
malinformation.
Oh yeah,
malinformation.
that's right. That's the bad. That's true, but bad.
That's a
We don't
really
talk about
bad
it.
stuff.
Yeah.
But I was going to say this about the going back to 2016 and the media, or at least the kind of left-leaning media, making sure they don't repeat their own mistakes. It's not only that, it was a good point about how much free advertising they gave, or free publicity, if you like, they gave to Trump, which they regret. But also, we all recall certain prominent left-leaning newspapers and other media outlets kind of making up these, what I'm assuming are completely fictitious polls, where they were basically saying we're giving Hillary Clinton a 93% chance of winning, and and Donald Trump a 7% chance of winning, and those kind of things were being thrown out.
Designed to keep people at home.
And so now they're not going to. They've learned their lesson. They got burned by that one. So now I think maybe that's why they're making the point of saying, "Hey, this is a close one now."
Well, there's an apolitical reason for it too, which is, as we know, the competitive race drives the clicks and the engagement, and so to the extent that the media properties want to keep people tuned in, it does benefit them that way.
Well, last night was a classic example. I mean, it was the weirdest Super Tuesday I've ever watched, really. It was like, now we're working Biden just won the state of blank. And I'm thinking, well, no kidding. He didn't have any competition, or he had the competition of a woman who already pulled out of the race. I mean, it was all night long. We were calling such and such a state for Joe Biden. Well, who else are you going to call it for? There's the what is it called? Not the unknowns, but the
none of the above.
None of the above.
No
Right.
preference.
None of the above. And yet,
no
13 or 15% had. There was a few none of the aboves that ranked in the double digits.
Yes, up to 18% in Michigan or Minnesota, as I recall, 18%.
Yeah,
and 13% uncommitted votes. I mean, that's a really bad portent.
No, that should terrify the Democratic Party.
What they
That's
should do is to create uniformity between no preference, none of the above, blah, blah, blah. They'll just put in the bottom, not Biden, just
Yeah.
not Biden.
So,
And then everyone will know they're voting against Joe Biden.
All right, so I was in my little pub last night, and we were tuning in. We were trying to watch a basketball game, and the results and all the different commentation, and and everybody was going, I won't vote for him, or I won't vote for him. And I'm like, well, who are you going to vote for? Because there you have it. You've got your two people that are selected. So are you just going to sit it out because you're mad, or are you going to exercise your right to vote? And I found it extremely bizarre how people pay so close attention until they don't, and they didn't understand the whole Super Tuesday process. And let's face it, Super Tuesday came around because, a bunch of southern states, and I think 1988 decided they wanted to be more,
relevant.
yeah, in electing a president. And so you've got all of this stuff going on, and yet nobody has a clue what's going on. I had somebody ask me this morning, well, did Trump beat Biden? I'm like, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. Super Tuesday works because each party, main party, blah, blah, blah. So I explain it, right? And they're like, but did Trump beat Biden?
All right, here's my question for you, Sarah. Do you lament the ignorance of your fellow Americans, or do you celebrate their divorcing their lives from politics, which we haven't the capacity to do?
Yeah.
A
I go
little
back,
bit
I
of
go back and
both.
forth on that question in my own mind,
Oh, a little bit of both. But I like the fact that people are curious and engaged, and people vote here. I mean, you're not going to see anybody sitting on their couch around here. They'll drag every old person, young person, whatever, to the polls. But it's a matter of understanding the process. And I think it's important that we're here explaining what the Super Tuesday process is for people that may or may not really have a clue.
Well,
That
in a
being
nutshell, can't you just say simply that Super Tuesday is the closest thing we have to a national primary day? I mean, that's
I
just
could,
Yeah.
but there's still a lot of states to be decided. We're close to the delegate count, obviously. I don't know where we're at the moment, but this was a big one. And so unless something stupid happens, and then that's where I'm going to bring Scott in on this, because
Well,
unless
wait,
some,
before you do,
sorry
before
about the
you do,
whole,
I have one question.
sorry about the stupid things.
Before you do, I have one question that I
Came out
wanted to
wrong.
ask earlier
My,
that I couldn't find a spot to get in for, and I wanted to ask, and I presume this is to Graham or Tim, but anybody who cares to weigh in. If the presumptive nominee, the Republican presumptive nominee, was not Donald Trump, but was a more, let's say, mainstream establishment type figure, how much reduction in support would we see for Nikki Haley, both in terms of votes cast and money spent on or donated to her campaign? Is it, a ton reduction, or is she a genuine kind of second placer now in the Republican Party, or third placer, depending on DeSantis? I just wanted some quick analysis on that, if I could.
Sort of
I
said,
would. I
go ahead.
personally believe that look, I'll give. I've never been exactly Nikki Haley's biggest fan, but I give her a lot of credit for what she achieved, and she has now surpassed any female Republican politician in terms of what she's achieved, and she actually won a couple of primaries,
Okay.
which in itself was historic. Okay, Washington D.C. and Vermont, but nevertheless, she won two primaries. So that was great. I give her plenty of credit for her efforts. But it's an interesting question, Scott, and I actually do veer towards thinking that there was still she was still propelled to a great extent in terms of money and support, still propelled by the anti-Trump vote. Even though we talked about earlier on, I don't believe that everyone who voted for Nikki Haley is a never Trumper. They don't have Trump derangement syndrome necessarily, but I believe a lot of the money that went into a campaign was the result of people trying to get a nominee who was not Donald Trump.
I think there are two groups of people basically within the Republican Party who didn't vote for Trump. The first group is the truly deranged, Bill Kristol, the people who literally lose their mind at the mention of Trump. There's those people.
Let's
And
call
then
them the orange man bad people.
yes,
Orange
right,
man bad.
it's the OMB, and we don't mean the Office of Management and Budget. But the other group are the people who say, look, Trump was a good president, but he blew it. I don't think he can win. I think that's the other group. There's the group that just doesn't like him, and the group that thinks he's unelectable because of January 6th and how he handled the end of his administration. So the question is, whether those people that think he can't win come home. I think they will. They're seeing what's happening. The people that hate him, if Bill Kristol and his like want to look in the mirror and say to themselves that they believe after fighting for conservative principles their whole lives, if they think they're better off voting for Joe Biden after the last 4 years, then they need to look a little closer in the mirror, I think.
That brings up the whole issue of January 6th and what's going to happen here with Trump. And Scott, you're our legal eagle at libertynation.com. And I'm just kind of wondering, are Trump's legal problems going to rear their heads very vociferously in the next 8 months?
Been a good couple of weeks for Mr. Trump on the legal front. So if the past is prelude, he's going to be all right. He got a big win at the Supreme Court on ballot access, which not only because of the nature of the per curiam opinion, which is that all 9 justices found that it was unconstitutional to keep him off the ballot. Now, there was a disagreement over the reasoning why and what the different expressions of those reasons have for future cases. But on the issue of removing Trump from the ballot, it was unanimous. And they spoke as one voice on that. And you have to remember, I got to find some clip of like the Schadenfreude moment where all the legal analysts are like, oh yeah, this is perfectly normal. Like it's, unassailable kind of to take him off the ballot, and not a single justice. Remember, not even the ones that are so, you could just feel it in their bones, don't want Donald Trump to be president, like a Sonia Sotomayor, for instance, or a Ketanji Brown Jackson. So
who was appointed by Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Ketanji Brown Jackson.
So he's doing great there in Georgia. Wow, it's hard to even describe what's happening there. Confucius said, when you start off on a mission of revenge, dig 2 graves. And that's what's happening there. Fani Willis has dug her own grave and is about to be put in it, politically, that is, of course. The revelations keep coming out. One of the best compliments, the one I liked receiving the most, was from Lisa K. Donner, who some years ago had heard me give some legal analyst piece of legal analysis regarding a Supreme Court case, and no one else was sort of talking about that. And then she had heard Alan Dershowitz say the same thing after I had said it, and she complimented me that I was the only other person that she had heard.
We're not worthy.
Right. Well, one other thing that Dershowitz is now saying that I had said previously, and I'm not accusing him of aping me, I'm just saying I'm in good company, is that what happens with the thing in Georgia is there are all the impetus is to shut up about Fani Willis's bad behavior if you're in that universe, because she's so powerful and the allies to that power are in place. But then there becomes a tipping point, so that while there becomes this massive resistance to telling the truth about what you know, when it becomes clear that it's going to be found out, then there's a rush on the other side where you don't want to be the lawyer who didn't tell the court what you know. And for people who don't know, lawyer jokes aside, lawyers have what's called a duty of candor to the court. So a lawyer is not allowed to say, well, you never asked me specifically if I saw this, horrible thing happen or malfeasance happening. I have a duty. If I'm a lawyer in Georgia and I had a conversation with any of those people about her romantic relationship with Mr. Wade, and I know that they lied about it on the stand because I watched it on TV, well, I better get my word processor going and type up a letter to the court.
A word processor.
Get your fanny going?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah,
funny.
My Fanny
okay,
and Fanny.
And
there.
she
Yeah.
likes that funny.
Yeah.
I was just going to give Scott a lot of credit there for pronouncing her name properly. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
it took
I
you.
would have called her
It
Fanny and
took him
blew
a
it all for
while.
all of us.
It
So
took my admonishing him repeatedly on the uprising before he finally consented to using as his statement was, on the uprising, it's Fanny.
The uprising,
yes.
for those of you who
But
do not
everybody
know,
else says
is
funny.
Liberty
On the
Teachers
uprising, it's Fanny.
podcast.
Oh, now everybody's getting, an inside view of internal squabbling.
Well, let
Well,
me
they're,
circle back around to Mr. Smith's prosecution of Mr. Trump,
That's
which
what
you
I
asked
was
about.
wondering.
Let's
Yeah.
go back to Scott. Yes, please.
And we're waiting on the Supreme Court to rule on Trump's immunity claim, which has been widely misreported that any act that he may do while he happens to be the president is what he's asking for immunity from.
Yep.
And the widely popularized question about the SEAL Team 6, like assassinating his political rivals, and his attorney said yes. That has been, I think, widely misreported as if Trump himself somehow advanced that argument rather than his attorney responding during oral argument to it. And it was a tough question to answer, to be sure, but I don't think that the Supreme Court will have to rule that Donald Trump could send SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political rivals to rule that when he takes acts that are commensurate with the office of presidency, that he is immune from prosecution for them. I don't necessarily think that's going to how it's going to come out, but those two things don't have to, be in the same place. But the big win, of course, for Donald Trump is from the Supreme Court, the timing. If all this can't get accomplished before the presidential election, well, I think we all know what if he wins, what a President Trump would do, with that prosecution, which is, first of all, I'm sure he would have the pardon ready to sign, like behind his back after he got done swearing in the, the oath, and just sign his own pardon. And then, of course, he would tell the
Can
Justice
you do
Department
that?
to.
Can you sign your own pardon,
Yes,
Scott?
Certainly.
you can.
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
Constitution says.
Because you are a citizen as well. And
Could be the president.
president has a right to pardon any
For any
citizen. I
federal
don't know
crime,
if
the president can issue a pardon, which is funny because the Georgia prosecution was their one hope. There's also there's still the New York Stormy Daniels prosecution, which is going
What
to go
about-
there's
nowhere.
Alvin
Where's
Bragg,
all of
too.
the? Where
Yeah.
was that
what
whole
about the
huge?
Mar-a-Lago, the
Oh, right.
confidential documents?
You know what, Tim? Thank you. Yeah, you got to keep the scorecard.
Right.
Yeah, there's that one as well, which also seems to be not advancing in a fashion rapidly enough to occur before the November elections, which again I think is, I'll speak for myself at least, the sole reason why those prosecutions were brought was to prevent his election for president, and as they'll vaporize if the election comes and goes.
It's
If all
interesting
the
because
things,
I think the American sense of fairness is really prominent in this election. They don't like when political parties start playing with the candidate that they want to vote for. They don't like him being removed from the ballot. They don't like when tons of SWAT cars show up at his house. All of this has kind of snowballed into making Trump more popular instead of less popular.
Yes, and
That-
and the
and I
Democrats
think,
are actually the Democrats are actually doubling down on that poor judgment now. A couple of them right after the Supreme Court ruled against the Colorado Supreme Court's decision to say that Trump was ineligible to run or ineligible to be on the primary ballot. Right after that Supreme Court decision, a couple of prominent Democrats came forward and said, okay, well, we're now going to write legislation, that basically says that Trump can't run for president because he's an insurrectionist,
right. So even if he wins, they will not allow him to be certified. This is the most tone deaf thing I've ever seen, because here they are accusing Trump of inciting an insurrection on January 6th. And here they are saying, well, even if he wins, we may not recognize. They're doing exactly what they are accusing Trump of. Now you think about, if you frame this election like no other, we've never seen anything like this. A guy on one side who's a doddering old man who can barely complete a sentence. On the other side, a guy who's under 91 criminal indictments. I mean, what can you say about an election where if one of the candidates wins, he goes to the White House, and if he loses, he goes to the big house?
Woohoo! What
That's
else can
pretty
you
much
say?
it. That's pretty much it, because if he loses,
Yeah, they'll just
he's
go
going to
get
wind
him.
up in prison one way or another. So
I
the
think, you
only
know,
way for Donald Trump to stay out of prison is to
I don't,
win the presidential election.
I can't imagine any US president going to prison in this day and age. It would so energize the MAGAites into doing ridiculous things.
Which
So
is what
no,
they
that's a
want
bad
them.
idea. It's a
But that's
bad idea
exactly what
to,
they would want them to do. They
That's
would
a
want
feature, not
them
a bug
to,
for
right.
oh, I
It's a
don't want to see
feature,
that
not, but they
happen.
would
All
want
right.
them to rebel and prove that January 6th was just the beginning. And now they would
Now they're,
rise up radically and it would be put down as a threat to democracy. And
I'm
that's
going to do
pretty much
something
what
nobody's
they'd
ever
have
done
in
in the
mind.
world and interrupt their husband. Okay. Sarah, you asked me to give you a fair warning, and we've got like 3 minutes left. So hit it, girl.
well, okay, guys. So I just want to know one thing. Are the Dems exhausted or are they going to keep going? So hit the horn and then we're going to close out, babes.
Well, they can't exactly be energized, can they? I mean,
I think they're tired.
Biden gaining
Maybe they're
victory,
not tired enough.
isn't exactly a call to arms. I think they're really trying to scratch their heads and figure this one out, and just hope that Biden can pull it out by the small numbers he did last time.
I think
If
they're
you go by
scared,
that, I'll just say.
scared S-less. They are scared S-less because
No.
the prospect of Trump getting back in, if only for what he's going to do to them after what they did to him. I think they're in abject panic. They don't know what to do. They don't want to keep Biden, but they can't get rid of him because that'd be too confusing and upsetting. They
I'm going
have
to have to
very
interrupt
few
you again.
options.
We've got 1 minute. Scott and Graham, go.
Yep, you both got 15 seconds. Make it count.
Well, I'll just say very quickly. I think the kind of rumors that Biden would be replaced at the last minute were always, unfounded, and I think we need to just kind of forget about that idea right now. I think that the Democrats will stick. Enough of them will stick. Enough of them despise Donald Trump so much that they'll happily vote for Biden.
There are many ways they have tried to convince people to not vote for Donald Trump, but too few people listened. So they have to do everything within their power to take away that choice from the American people, and they'll continue to do that.
All righty, gang. Well, that's it for our special Super Tuesday Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill, and remember to hop on over to libertynation.com for original articles and lots more. Remember, that's free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Thanks for joining us today.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.